Hey, yeah. So I'm going to talk about something which is perhaps really obvious if you're a pianist, but I don't find it obvious from the guitar fretboard at all. And this is the idea of key-centric thinking, okay? And I'll explain why it's obvious on the piano and not obvious on the guitar. So most of us, when we construct chords and scales, chord scales and things like that from a chart, would think of the root of the chord. So for instance, if I've got a D7 and I've got a sharp 11th, I think of that sharp 11th being, or sharp 4, whatever, being an interval above the root note, and then add it into my voicing, you know, or alter, you know, the voice I've already got there, which is the natural fifth going to a flat fifth, or however you like to do it. You know, scale-wise, you know, it's the same thing. I might construct, you know, a Lydian dominant scales. I might go, well, what's the Lydian dominant scale? It's 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, 7, flat 7, 1. So 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. You know, that kind of stuff. Basic fretboard mapping, right? Knowledge of scales and so on. So this is all great. I'm certainly not saying don't learn this, but the thing that I think is obvious on the piano that isn't obvious on the guitar is the fact that how all this relates to the central key, because you know standards, like most Western tonal music, is based around a key center, and that key center may change. So for instance, in Body and Soul we start off in the key of D flat major, but when we go to the bridge we move into D major and C major, for instance, and there are lots of localized little key, well, you could say there's localized little keys within the A section, so you could think of it as going towards like you know, the relative minor at this point, and then back to D flat. So it kind of goes via, you know, B flat minor or whatever, you know. So you can look at it that way as well. But from the generally, you know, you think of that Body and Soul A section as being in D flat major, and then there being modulations in the B section. So a lot of standards don't even modulate, like, you know, Just Friends would be an example. It doesn't even change key. It's solidly in G major, but there are chromatic alterations to that key which make for a more interesting harmony, such as the 4 minor or the flat 6, 7, for instance. Okay, so with that in mind, you know, I'm thinking, like, you know, what can we understand from the point of view of you know, the basic key? And I actually found out I started thinking about this very naturally when I started playing on the piano, because if you do your examples in C major, even somebody like me who's not a piano player at all can understand whether or not I'm playing a black note to get that chord, okay, or that scale. So it becomes readily apparent. Obviously on the guitar we have this problem, which is that, sorry, can't even play it right. You know, the C major scale is like a semi kind of arbitrary collection of dots on the fretboard, if you like. You know, it's shapes that you have to memorize. So on some level, even if you know there's a C and a D and an E and everything else, you know. So, well, the very basic level of this I started thinking about was like diatonic chords. So this isn't a Barry thing. I'm going to just do it to keep it simple from the point of view of the standard sort of seventh chords that people learn. So in the key of C major, I'm aware that, you know, for instance, in the 2-5-1, you have, you know, the guide tones. So that in terms of the key, that's like a 1 and a 4, then it's a 7 and a 4, and then it's a 7 and a 3. But of course, if we're thinking about it from the point of view of chords, that's you know, thirds and sevenths of each chord, right? But from the point of view of the key, the 1 even, 4, 7, and then 3 and 1, okay? So, you know, it's actually not much movement at all, and that's what voice leading is. You know, and it gives you that sense of the movement of the progression. If you're playing with the bass, that might be all you have to play, you know. So with that in mind, I'm sort of thinking, well, the thing about the major scale is it's got stable notes and it's got unstable notes, and the least stable note you can think of in the major scale is the fourth. So if I play, you know, a C major triad, for instance, and then try to sing the fourth on top of it, it really wants to go down. And, you know, you can think of all sorts of reasons for that, you know. Adam Neely would probably talk about the harmonic overtone spectrum or something, you know, all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, the fourth doesn't really belong to that C major spectrum in quite the same way that even the B belongs to it, or the A, you know. Those notes integrate a lot better the basic C major key, right? But that F, it stands out. And for that reason, it's sometimes called an avoid note. So they say don't play the F over, you know, over a C major chord. I mean, of course, you know, you find lots of examples of it being used over a C major chord. I mean, if I'm in the A flat major, an example I can think of is Chi. But it resolves down to the third, right? So it's not, you know, over A flat. That would be quite unusual, certainly for bebop. So that fourth is an unstable note. So that made me think, okay, so what if I just categorise all seventh chords in the key of C major according to whether or not they have an F in, or the fourth in. And when I did that, something interesting came up. So you've got C major, and you've got E minor, and you've got E minor seventh rather, and A minor seventh. None of those have an F in. Well, these are all, to some extent or another, tonic chords. E minor often subs in for C major, and actually C major seventh actually has an E minor triad in it, you know, and A minor is obviously the relative minor of C major. You might know, a lot of soul tunes do that. Of course, if I have the if I play all three of those in that order, ya da da ya ba da da ba da do. That's Nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. So you know you could say the first few bars of that tune are just different expressions of chords without a fourth in. You know, tonic function chords. Okay. So then the interesting thing is when I put the F in the other chords, what you get is basically what I call the family of four. So we've had three chords which don't have an F in. Well, there's only seven seventh chords in the key, so there have to be four other chords. This is what I call, well, actually it comes from Cheryl Bailey. She calls it the family of four. And these are all chords which can read in for the, you know, the dominant. In Barry Harris thinking, we can put any of those chords in for the dominant, and that's fine because they all belong to the dominant scale. I'll talk about that in a second. But these chords are G7, B half diminished, D minor seventh, and F major seventh. Okay, and any of those make a good substitute. If we're running, you know, arpeggios from, or you know, building chords from each chord tone of G7, this is what you get, right? And it just so happens that in a lot of Barry Harris lines, by the way, if I'm running, you know, if I'm doing like the add a note rules, I will always tend to go up on arpeggios if I'm doing it on the beats, on chord tones, because that's where you end up. You know, that's what the thing is designed to do. So I would go, you know, ya do ya do ya do da, you know, or ya ya do ya boom boom da da, you know, the minor seventh, or you know, whatever. You know, so these sounds feature very heavily, even though you can use, you know, any of the sounds in the C major that you want over the G7. They all work, you know. You could play C major, A minor, whatever. It's all fine. And the interesting thing is, I mean, this is why I talk about, one of the reasons why I talk about letting the dominant dominate, or why Barry Harris, I suppose, talks about it, is because actually, you know, any of the notes on G7 will work great because you're resolving into something there. You know, you can't use the whole scale on C major, because if you use the F, if I run you know, that is part of the C scale, but it will want to resolve, you know. So I'm using, you know, Barry Harris's fourth phrase to resolve that. You know, just because, you know, you kind of have to do that. It's a good line, but you're still kind of expressing an unstable chord. So that F note becomes really critically important, becomes like a pivot around which all the other chords in the key move. And I think, like, because the B isn't really so important, you know, we can leave that unresolved in jazz. That is the main sort of engine of the harmony, as far as I can hear it. You know, even if you play like 7 sus4 chords and stuff, you know, they still want to resolve back to C, even without having that B in. So I think that's kind of an important thing, and it kind of separates the key into two basic functions. Now, Peter Bernstein Klang told me that he thinks in two chord functions. He thinks in 1 and 5. well, I mean, that's it then, isn't it? There's only two functions, and subdominant can read in for 5. Subdominant is kind of a little bit different from 5. He said maybe 4 is a bit separate from 5, but basically there's only really two functions. And in terms of the diatonic key, you can see that kind of falls right out of it. Right, so we're going to move on. Obviously, not all progressions in the world are diatonic. So this brings us to, what kind of chromatic chords we might have. And the thing is that if you think about everything from the root of the chord, it can be obscure as to what they are. So if I play like an F minor 6, or I play a G7 flat 9, or I play a D half diminished, or I play a B diminished 7th, or I play an A minor major 7th, or I play an E7 flat 9, it's not immediately obvious what all these chords have in common, or at a G13 flat 9. And I think if we're thinking about the chord scale system, we might be, you might go, well, okay, so the G7 flat 9, well, that's kind of like an altered sound, so it's like F melodic minor. If I think about the, F minor major 7th, I might be thinking, maybe the same thing could work, F melodic minor, but this would be like A melodic minor, So you're thinking of a few different scales already, this thing, or maybe that's a diminished scale. And these are all valid and good sounding options, but the thing is actually it's a lot simpler than that, because if you write them down or you look at them on a piano keyboard, you realise what they all have in common is this note, which is the flat 6. Check it out, Barry fans. Okay, so that is, or a sharp 5 if you spell it the other way, or that would be a sharp 5, but it's the same note. So suddenly we have, well, we can think about that as, the harmonic major or whatever. Think of that as the harmonic minor. That's sort of, just the same note. So, in fact, I sort of found like this is a little device that people like Jim Hall and Django Reinhardt have used, and that's just like Django Reinhardt, not Django Reinhardt. Sorry, I can't speak anymore. Okay, so if I do this sort of F minor triad with a flat, then another 2 in it, what Jordan would call a tetrad, or quadrad, sorry, that is, that works over all of those chords. So I play like, it works great over the E7. It works fantastically, obviously, over the F minor 6, because that's what it is. It also works very well over the G7 flat 9. And this chord, which, gets variously called, I think it was a G sharp diminished with an E in the treble, but you can also, and this is how it's most often written down by gypsy jazz musicians, it's a G13 flat 9. But it's understood that the guitarist would generally play that voicing for it. Anyway, it comes up a lot in loads of stuff. It's a funny chord because it doesn't really have a good name or a simple name, but it's very, very common. But if you think of it as a G13 flat 9, then it... And if you go and listen to like Django's solo on, I think the first version he recorded of Django's Castle, or Manoir de mes rêves, you will hear him use that sound. You'll hear Jim Hall use it on a 4 minor in his solo on Without a Song, and it just comes up everywhere. It's just useful advice. So by understanding that, what I've been able to do, play it on D half diminished, I've been able to unite all these separate chord, which you might think of as separate and belonging to different scales, I've understood all of these as being, as being part of the same basic thing, which is that it's a flat 6 alteration. That's all it is, so you can play that in your lines, play something with a flat 6 in, and it will work over that progression, That's misspelling it. If I play that F minor over E7, of course, all you kind of jazz theory nerds are going to tell that's an altered thing, isn't it? But, it's E altered scale, F minor, F melodic minor, over E. but actually, you know, it's all in, you know, if I was to play the whole altered scale, I'd have to, you know, alter another note, which would be the flat 7 as well. So it's not necessarily, it's not necessary to do that to get that sound, but it is that sound. But then if I was to flat the 7th as well, then I'd be putting it into the realm of, you know, of the flat 7. I'll be getting more of that kind of tonality for the E7, you know, and I could get the B flat 7 sharp 11th sound, backdoor. You know, so it's only a short step to go there. Anyway, I'll talk a bit more about the alter scale and all that stuff later. So, but just by recognising that simple fact, you can actually get a lot of mileage out of just a few elements, and you can. I think like one thing I find it useful for as well is like, you know, voice leading. So if I have this shape, which is like an altered, you know, an augmented triad, and I can use that. You know, I could use that, for instance, that voice leading to play a 2-5-1. You know, for instance, or if I got this sound, you know, I'm thinking, oh, well, I could play the E major over, you know, over the 5-7 flat 9. You know, that sounds pretty hip. You know, it's like I can swap them all around. So E major, I mean, over, well, if I was doing this, maybe like all of me. Could I do that? You know, could I go like F major? And E minor perhaps for the C major? You know, it's like, it suggests different voice movements and different ways of playing over these progressions, which is really handy. And of course, as all the Barry fans will tell you, it's the major 6th diminished scale, you know. So there you go. So that unpacks some of the richness you can find within that scale. The flat 6 is probably the most commonly played alteration to the major key. That's why that scale is so useful. Another one might be sharp 4, which unites the relative minor, and then if Barry fans were in A minor 6th diminished by that point. But it also relates to D7 and tells you that D7 and A minor are part of the same thing. You know, boffins can talk about Lydian dominant there. You know, and then, you know, for something, you know, that's a beautiful chord, the D slash F sharp going to, you know, going to this one. So if we're adding in the sharp 4 and then the flat 6, so if I go, you know, here I am, that's D major. Oh, how pretty is that? So yeah, so playing like D major, and then which is like D. It's also F sharp half diminished, going to F minor 6th. And then some kind of nice inversion of C major there. It's like, you know, you're only thinking of 2 notes there. So, let me see, where am I? You know, you know, it's a simple little phrase that you can play over. You're no longer thinking about, oh, I've got to play, you know, an A melodic minor over that one and an F melodic minor over the other one, you know, whatever, you know. It allows you to pinpoint the important notes harmonically, and also the notes to avoid if you just want to play diatonically over that progression. So, you know, you wouldn't play, you know, you wouldn't play the F on the D7 chord, but that note's fine, you know, and you can stay on that note for that, you know, you can stay on the E. So this would be all right, wouldn't it? So and that tells you something about chord melody and you know, the voice leading that you would put under the melody of a tune that happened to, you know, for instance, jingle bells, jingle, or, you know, it's like, sorry, a bit unseasonal there, but you know, it's like a note that sits on, you know, a melody that sits on the 3rd. You know, you can do something with that. You know, you could go you know, I mean, you can do different stuff which you wouldn't necessarily think of just by substituting chords. Anyway, yeah. So there's a few other things like, you know, knowing that sharp 1 diminished relates to, you know, the A7 flat 9 chord. You know, all that stuff just falls straight out of understanding how these notes line up with the notes of the key, or how they change it or deflect it, alter it, sharp it, flat it, whatever. And I've really found this an enormous amount of use for just categorizing different types of chord progressions. You know, for instance, I know, you know, this thing here, you know, all falls into that category for me, so that's great. So, you know, I've got like 3 chords, probably, you know, more than that, you know, half diminished, A minor 6, you know. By the way, Barry thinks about this as going, you know, he thinks of that motion. This chord, F sharp, half diminished, in this key would be like A minor 6th, right? Same thing. Okay, so you know, that relationship maps itself out, and you have things like sorry, my brain has gone completely. Where was I? Oh yeah. Yeah, so that is kind of how I view it. Going into the altered scale, I just wanted to quickly talk about the altered scale because I think, like, people, again, you know, people want to make alterations to the key that aren't strictly necessary. So, for instance, we've talked about the 5/7 flat 9 being, you know, basically just the flat 6 of the key. You know, it's pretty, you know. You just got to change that note. So I put flat 13 as well. You know. Oh, by the way, the 13 flat 9. Again, that's just. That's simple. You know, you're just kind of. You're just in the. You're just flattening the 6th. But then you'll notice that I also use the sharp 9 there, and you get many. You know, many phrases in bebop, for instance, that use both the natural 7th and the flat 7th of the key, so B and B flat. You know, because this sounds, it sounds too jumpy to use the augmented 2nd there. You know, same as Bach, you know, right? And all those guys. Yeah, so, I mean, anyway, so you're thinking of this like the flat 13th anyway, that's the E flat, so you're suddenly thinking about being in like C harmonic minor. And if you use that, you're actually just thinking of the G7 and the key of C minor. So I'm using C harmonic minor and C natural minor there together. You can use melodic minor as well to get the, you know, the natural 9th. There's no, you know, you hear that a lot in Bach and Charlie Parker and Charlie Christian and all sorts. You know, you just think that's minor key dominant. So the altered isn't really necessary for any of that stuff, or the diminished scale. But if you want to get the altered or diminished sound, you can very easily do that by using the flat 2. So, and that also gives you, I mean, it's the same thing as a tritone sub when you're doing that, right? So, you know, for instance, Night in Tunisia. Yeah? Like that chromatic enclosure around the C, around the root. You know, that, you know, that's a flat 5 on the G7 chord. You know, and how you voice lead that, you know, is kind of as important as the fact that it is a flat 5. You know, you can do that, or, you know, like, it's like you start thinking about the lead line. So you're kind of making an integration between the melodic aspect and what's going on in the harmony. I think that stuff's really important. By the way, if you want to, you know, flat all the notes you want to flat, you also have the flat 5 as well, which gives you, you know, the D7 scale, which is like, contains this note, which you wouldn't normally, you know, you would fail your jazz harmony exam if you wrote that note in. Major 7th on the G7, F sharp on the G7 chord. But if I make that as part of voice leading, it works great. Okay, so, you know, then you have the complete chromatic spectrum working in your, you know, in your resolution, and it's like, you know, Maybe something to do with Schoenberg. Who knows? Anyway, so that's how I think about harmony from a key-centric point of view, and it's really helped me. I'm not saying don't analyse things from the point of view of the chord root, because that's another reference frame, if you like, for looking at it. But I really find that that understanding of things from a key-centric point of view, and just what black notes you would use if you're thinking about the piano keyboard in that key, has really enormously helped me just like stick down and contextualise all this apparently diverse harmonic information. There's really not that much. I mean, when you think about it in C major, you've only got 5 chromatic notes, and how you, combine those chromatic notes, again, it's a limited, some combinations which come up more often. So, for instance, it's common to use a flat 7 with a sharp 1. It's common to use a flat 3 with a sharp 4, because they're the diminished chords, right? So things like that, just by studying, like, songs and substitutes, you can kind of come to those conclusions yourself a bit, because otherwise this video would go on for 3 hours, and it's gone on for long enough already. But I just want to propose that, as another way of looking at it that you might find useful and helpful for the necessary work of categorising a lot of diverse information and finding ways you can apply one thing over other stuff. It also might help you hear those changes as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think below. Bye.